My mom was renting me a room for $600, and then my aunt with 3 children moved into my room for free. So here's my story. I'm 24, my name's Oliver, and I live with my mom. Before you assume I'm some basement-dwelling leech, let me make something very clear. I pay $650 in rent, I cover our electric bill, and I even pay for her phone plan. This isn't about laziness. It's strategy. I work in video production, freelance gigs mostly, and my room is both my bedroom and my studio. I've invested over $3,500 in my gear. This isn't some webcam and ring light setup. I'm talking softboxes, an A7S III, color grading monitor, soundproofing, the works. It had been going really well. I liked our arrangement. I had privacy, a roof over my head, and enough space to work on editing contracts, filming local commercials, and occasionally helping indie creators with their content. My mom and I had a rhythm. We kept out of each other's way and met in the kitchen sometimes like friendly roommates. But then, everything changed when the guests showed up. It started on a Tuesday. I was coming back from a client shoot, hauling gear back into the house, already planning to scrub footage in DaVinci Resolve. When I walked in, I heard voices, kids. I don't have nieces or nephews, and my mom never mentioned visitors. I figured maybe someone from her church or an emergency situation, you know? I dropped my gear in my room and went to find her. She was in the kitchen, making grilled cheese and soup. I asked, "What's with the noise?" She said, "Oh, that's Kelly's kids. She's going to be staying with us for a bit." Kelly is my mom's coworker. I'd met her once, maybe twice. I didn't even know she had kids. "How long is a bit?" I asked. She shrugged. "Until she figures stuff out." I didn't love it, but I get it. Life happens. People need help. The kids were kind of loud, but I had noise-canceling headphones. I figured I could deal. That lasted maybe 5 days before things started slipping. The first issue? One of the kids wandered into my room while I was color grading a wedding video. I caught him just as he was reaching for my gimbal. That gimbal cost me $750. I calmly but firmly told him to leave and shut the door. When I brought it up to my mom later, she said, "He's just curious. Maybe you could show him how it works." I said, "Mom, this isn't a toy. This is my job." Then it escalated. One morning I woke up and noticed my door was slightly ajar. My headphones were on the floor. My backup SSD was missing. Found it under the couch in the living room with a freaking juice stain on it. That SSD had 3 ongoing client projects. I lost nearly 6 hours recovering data and missed a soft deadline. My client was nice about it, but still, my reputation matters. I sat my mom down that night. I said, "This can't keep happening. I need the room to be off limits." She sighed and said, "You're being a bit dramatic. They're just kids, Oliver. Have some compassion." I said, "Compassion doesn't pay my invoices. If they ruin something, are you going to replace it?" She didn't answer. She just said Kelly was doing her best and not to make things harder. A week later, it got worse. I came home late after filming an outdoor event and walked into my room to find my monitor on. Someone had been in there. My mic arm was bent and the memory card from my camera was missing. I nearly lost my mind. I tore through the house looking for it. Found it jammed into the Xbox in the living room. I don't know which kid did it. I don't care. That card had raw footage from a local campaign ad that had a strict NDA. If that got leaked or corrupted, I could be sued. That was the breaking point. I told my mom point blank, "I need them out of the room. I need a lock on my door. This is non-negotiable." She said, "They're only going to be here another couple of weeks. Can't you just be patient?" I didn't scream, but I was close. "You didn't even ask me before letting them into this house. They've touched thousands of dollars of equipment. You're asking me to be patient while they put my livelihood at risk." She got quiet. Then she said, "You're always so focused on money. Can't you just be kind?" That hit a nerve. Because this wasn't about kindness. I've been kind. I pay rent. I carry this house. I give her the freedom to work part-time and still have a stable place to live. I buy groceries half the time. I clean up after myself. And now I'm being made out to be the selfish one because I want to protect the thing I've built? 2 nights later, I installed the deadbolt. My mom was pissed. Said I was treating the house like a prison. I told her straight up, "This isn't about the house. It's about boundaries. You broke them. Things are tense now. Kelly's still here. So are the kids. But they don't come into my room anymore. The lock works. I barely leave my room unless I have to. The house doesn't feel like home right now. It feels like I'm renting a room in a stranger's place. And the thing is, I don't even hate Kelly. She's trying. But my mom should have told me. She should have included me in the decision. Instead, she just expected me to roll with it, like my work doesn't matter. I'm already looking at studio apartments nearby. It'll cost me more, sure. But at least I'll be in control of my space again. I had only been gone for about 40 minutes. Just a quick run to the store to pick up some snacks and paper towels before diving into an editing session I'd already blocked out my whole afternoon for. As I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, I noticed it right away. The house wasn't quiet. There was laughter, no, screaming, and the heavy thud of something falling. It wasn't coming from the living room or the kitchen. It was coming from my room. At first, I thought maybe one of the kids had wandered in again like they had a few times before, but when I got to the hallway, my heart immediately started pounding. My bedroom door was wide open. My gear, my setup, my space, completely exposed. And then I saw it. Both of Tracy's kids were in my room. One of them was standing on my desk chair spinning himself in circles, hands clutching the edge of my desk for balance, while the other had somehow climbed onto the small table where I kept my microphone rig and was poking at the mic with a plastic sword. My $600 boom mic, which was tilted sideways at an angle that definitely wasn't how I left it. The monitor, my main color grading display, was on, showing some YouTube video they'd queued up, probably after mashing my keyboard. My camera had been pushed to the back corner of the table like it was a coaster. I froze in the doorway, stunned. "What the hell is going on?" I said, my voice louder than I meant, but I didn't care. Both kids jumped. The one on the desk chair nearly fell backward but caught himself, laughing like it was part of some game. Tracy came in behind me a second later, holding a laundry basket like nothing was out of the ordinary. She gave me this breezy, distracted smile. "Oh hey, they just needed a little more space to play." The guest room was getting too cramped. I turned to her, completely dumbfounded. "They're in my room," I said, stating it flatly because I couldn't wrap my head around it yet. "My equipment is in here. My work. This isn't a playroom." Tracy shrugged. "I was just going to move a few things so they could stretch out. I figured you wouldn't mind." "You figured I wouldn't mind?" I repeated, staring at her like she'd just told me she set my computer on fire. "This is where I work. This is my job. This isn't just my bedroom. This is my studio. These aren't things you just move around like a couch." The kid with the sword was now sitting on my rolling chair, spinning in circles again. I moved fast across the room and grabbed the back of the chair to stop it. "Out, out, now," I said, trying to stay calm, but feeling the pressure rise in my chest. He scowled at me and mumbled something I didn't catch, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to argue with a 10-year-old in my own space. I motioned them both toward the door. Tracy looked offended. "You don't have to be so aggressive about it," she said. "They're kids. They're not going to break anything just by sitting near it." I almost laughed. Really? My SSD was almost destroyed last time, and now my mic's probably damaged. "You don't get it. This isn't just a bedroom. I make a living in here. If something breaks, I can't afford to replace it overnight." That's when my mom showed up. She came in with this frown like she was walking into a conversation she didn't want to deal with. "What's all the yelling?" she asked. I looked at her, still stunned. "They're in my room." Tracy moved them into my room. Janet didn't look surprised. Not one bit. That was the part that made my stomach sink. She already knew. She just hadn't told me. "I was going to talk to you about that," she said, glancing at Tracy like they'd rehearsed this together. "The guest room isn't working. It's too small for all of them. Your room has more space, and you don't need the whole thing just for work." That sentence hit me like a gut punch. I don't need the whole thing. "This isn't a spare bedroom," I said slowly. "This is my room. I pay rent. I pay bills. I pay for your phone, Mom. And now you're saying I don't even deserve to have the one space I pay for to myself?" "You're being selfish," Tracy chimed in, folding her arms. "We're going through a lot right now. You could show a little empathy." I stared at both of them, my face burning. Selfish. That was the word they landed on. I didn't yell. I didn't start breaking things. I just stepped to my desk, gently unplugged my monitor, my camera, my mic rig, and started packing my gear. Neither of them said anything for a minute. I think they were waiting for me to cool off, to eventually stop and say something conciliatory. But I didn't. I just kept unplugging and wrapping cables. "Oliver," my mom said, finally, "where are you going to put all that?" "I don't know," I said, still not looking at her. "But it's not staying here." And that's how I lost my room. Not because I moved out. Not because I stopped paying rent. But because my mom thought my work didn't matter, and her friend thought my room was just a convenient extra space for her kids to play in. I didn't sleep that night. I moved my gear into the garage and locked the door. Sat in a folding chair, staring at my camera bag like it was some kind of hostage. I could still hear them laughing inside, as if nothing had happened. I was standing in the kitchen, still trying to breathe evenly, still trying to process what I had just walked into. My hands were shaking, not from rage exactly, but from this dizzying sense of being completely unmoored. I had just pulled my $200 lens out of a laundry basket where one of Tracy's kids had tossed it like it was a dirty t-shirt. My mic stand had been bent, the monitor I used to grade footage was smeared with fingerprints and God knows what else, and all I had done was ask them to respect my space. I didn't yell. I didn't slam doors. I just stood there and said, as calmly as I could, that this couldn't continue. They were in my room, Mom, I said, voice low but tight. They were sitting on my computer, my actual workstation. This is how I pay my bills. This is my job. Janet didn't even look up from what she was doing, slicing tomatoes, of all things, like we were just having a normal afternoon. Then she scoffed. Oh, for God's sake, Oliver, don't dramatize. They're just kids. I blinked. Just kids? That doesn't mean they get to crawl over thousands of dollars of gear like it's a jungle gym. That's not how this works. They need space, she said sharply, finally turning around. And you have the biggest room. You've had it to yourself this whole time. You can deal with this. I stared at her. My voice came out quieter, but tighter. Because I pay for it. Because I've built my work in that room. Because it's not just a bedroom. It's my studio. It's where I make my living. It's the only reason I can afford to live here and still cover your phone bill and half the groceries. She rolled her eyes like I was listing imaginary achievements. You're being selfish, she said, and I swear to God, there wasn't even a flicker of hesitation. We've helped you enough. It's just a room. Helped me. I repeated. I've been helping you. I'm not staying here for free, Mom. You know that. You needed help with the bills, and I stepped up. But you didn't even ask before giving my room away. You didn't talk to me. You just let them move in like it didn't matter what I thought. That's when Tracy, who had been sitting at the table with her laptop and pretending not to listen, suddenly inserted herself into the conversation. She didn't even look up from the screen when she said it. Maybe if you weren't so stressed all the time, the kids would listen to you. I froze. My mouth actually fell open. What? I said, my voice tight, controlled, but not by much. She looked at me then, all calm and condescending like she was explaining something simple to a child. You come off tense. The kids pick up on that. If you were a little more relaxed, they might not be so wild around you. I wanted to laugh, or scream, or break something. Instead, I turned back to my mom. So that's it? I asked. I'm the problem? Not the fact that 2 children were literally using my equipment as a jungle gym. Not the fact that you took over my space without saying a word. Not the fact that I've been covering your bills and quietly supporting this house for the last 2 years. No, it's just that I'm too stressed. Neither of them answered. Tracy just went back to typing. My mom turned away and kept slicing tomatoes, like that was more important than the fact she'd basically just told me that my work, my income, and my right to privacy didn't mean a damn thing. I stood there for a long second, the sound of the knife on the cutting board echoing in the silence, and then I just walked out of the kitchen. That night, I waited until the house was quiet. Tracy had finally corralled her kids into the guest room, or at least they'd stopped thudding around, and my mom was sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of tea, flipping through her mail like nothing had happened. I stood in the doorway for a second, watching her, trying to figure out how to even begin. I didn't want to argue. I didn't want to raise my voice. I just wanted to talk like adults, because somehow that seemed to have become impossible lately. Can we talk for a minute? I asked. She looked up and gave a small, tired sigh, like I was already bothering her. What now? I ignored the tone. I sat across from her and kept my voice steady. I need to find a solution. I can't keep going like this. My room was full of kids today. They were on my computer. My mic's bent. My lens could have been destroyed. That equipment isn't replaceable. Not for me. Not right now. That setup is how I pay rent. It's how I pay the electric bill. It's how I pay for your phone. It's not a toy. She didn't say anything. She just kept looking at me, eyebrows raised slightly, waiting for me to finish. I'm willing to compromise, I went on. Let me move my gear into the guest room. The kids can have my bedroom if that's what needs to happen. I'll squeeze in there with my stuff. At least that way my work is safe. She shook her head instantly, as if the suggestion was ridiculous. There's not enough space in the guest room, she said. You'd never fit all your junk in there. Besides, that's Tracy's room now. You'll just have to be patient. She needs help. I stared at her for a second, not quite believing how fast she'd dismissed the idea. Okay, then what about one of the other rooms? I asked. My brother's room? My sister's? They don't have jobs to do in there. It's not like they have fragile equipment lying around. She gave a short, dismissive laugh and shook her head again. You know that's not an option. Their stuff is in there. I blinked slowly. Their stuff? I repeated. And mine isn't. Mom, I pay to live here. I've worked hard to build what I have. This isn't just about furniture or comfort. This is about my ability to do my job. If something breaks, I'm out of work. Her voice dropped, flat and tired. We're all making sacrifices right now. You're not the only one with problems. I'm not saying I am, I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. I'm saying I need the tools I use to make a living to be somewhere safe. That's not a sacrifice. That's basic respect. She closed her eyes for a second, like she was counting to 10. You're going to have to find a way to make it work. I don't know what else to tell you. Tracy is going through a divorce. She needs support. Her kids need space. You'll just have to figure something out. I sat there for another moment, letting her words settle in. Not once did she ask what I needed. Not once did she acknowledge what I was trying to give up. She just expected me to shrink, to be smaller, to bend until there was nothing left. And when I realized there was no point in going further, I stood up and left the kitchen without another word. It was late, maybe close to midnight, and I couldn't sleep. I tried, but I kept hearing every noise in the house, every creak in the floor, every laugh from the guest room, every whispered voice. My equipment was still boxed in the garage, and the thought of it sitting out there, vulnerable to the cold and the damp and whatever else, made my chest ache. I finally gave up on sleep and went back inside. The kitchen light was still on, and my mom was at the table in her robe, scrolling through something on her tablet with her glasses low on her nose. I didn't sit down this time. I stood across from her, arms crossed, and just said it. We need to talk. Really talk. She looked up at me, clearly tired, but not surprised. She set the tablet down and rubbed her forehead like she already regretted this conversation. What now, Oliver? I can't keep living like this, I said. I can't work. I can't sleep. My studio is in boxes in the garage. I've lost 2 clients this week because I couldn't deliver on time. I tried compromising. I tried moving things around, and all I've gotten in return is ignored. I've paid rent every month without fail. I've covered utilities. I've even paid your phone bill. And now you're telling me that my space doesn't matter because Tracy's kids need to run around. She let out a breath, stood up slowly, and walked to the sink like she needed to be moving in order to respond. This is my house, Oliver, she said, her back to me. I decide what happens here. The words hit harder than I expected. I just stood there, stunned for a second, letting them echo. When she turned back around, I didn't yell. I didn't even raise my voice. I just asked, so it doesn't matter that I've been paying to live here? She shrugged. It helps, but at the end of the day, it's still my house. And Tracy's needs matter more than mine? I asked, voice quieter now, because I already knew the answer. She didn't hesitate. She has nowhere else to go. She has 2 children to take care of. You're an adult. You can manage. You're strong enough. It wasn't just the words. It was the way she said them. Like I was a tool, not a person. Like all the rent and the bills and the quiet, endless hours of editing in that room didn't mean anything. Like she'd already decided that I was the one who should bend. I nodded slowly. Not because I agreed, but because I understood. Okay, I said. Then here it is. Either Tracy and the kids move out of my room, and I get my space back, the space I pay for, or I move out completely. I'll find somewhere else to live. But I won't keep paying to be treated like I don't matter. Her expression didn't change much. Maybe a flicker of disbelief. Maybe not even that. I didn't wait for her response. I turned around and went back to the garage, sat on one of the moving boxes with my camera bag on my lap, and started planning my next steps in my head, already knowing that she'd made her choice long before I gave her mine. The following week dragged by like a bad dream on repeat. Every day I woke up in the cold garage, surrounded by cardboard boxes and coiled extension cords, my gear stacked in corners like forgotten junk. My mattress was just a spare foam pad I'd found in the basement, and every night I'd lie on it, staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled noise of the house I used to call home. It wasn't just inconvenient anymore. It felt hostile. No one spoke to me unless they had to. My mom moved around me like I was a piece of furniture, and Tracy acted like I didn't exist unless I happened to be in her way. My work had come to a standstill. I'd been turning down jobs left and right because I had no setup, nowhere to record, nowhere to edit. Every day I lost income. Every day I felt myself pulling further away from the version of myself who used to sit at his desk for 12 hours straight, fine-tuning footage and thinking it was all building towards something. Now it felt like it had all been paused, indefinitely, and no one seemed to care. One afternoon I finally snapped. I needed a few things, just the tripod and a lighting rig, nothing major. I waited until the house was quiet, mid-afternoon, when the kids usually napped or zombied out in front of the TV. I went up to the door that used to be mine and knocked lightly, out of habit. Then I turned the knob and pushed it open. Tracy was standing right inside, folding laundry on what used to be my bed. She looked up immediately, no surprise on her face, just this cold, flat disapproval that hit me like a slap. "What are you doing?" she asked, like I was trespassing. "I need to grab some of my equipment," I said, keeping my voice even. She stepped forward, blocking the doorway without hesitation. "This is their room now," she said, not even trying to soften it. "You need to respect their space." I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, looking past her at what had been mine. My desk was gone. My shelves, cleared. My monitor and mic rig were still in a pile near the corner, but they'd been shoved aside to make room for bean bags and plastic bins of toys. The blackout curtains I'd installed for lighting control were drawn wide open, sun pouring in like it belonged to someone else. There was nothing left that looked like me. I looked back at Tracy. She didn't budge. She didn't flinch. She just kept staring, like this was her house, her hallway, her rules. And that's when it hit me, really hit me. This wasn't my home anymore. It hadn't been for a while. I'd been holding on to the idea of it, pretending that paying rent meant something, that helping out gave me a place here. But it didn't. Not to them. I was just an adult kid who hadn't moved out yet. A placeholder. An easy source of income who was now in the way. I stepped back from the door. I didn't say anything else. There was nothing left to say. I walked back down the hall, past the living room where my mother sat scrolling through her phone like the past week hadn't happened, and then back out to the garage where the air smelled like dust and cold concrete. That night, I started packing for real. Not my gear, not my work setup, my life. Clothes, hard drives, cables, toothbrush. The bare minimum. Enough to get out. Enough to stop pretending. Enough to finally admit that whatever this place had once been for me, it wasn't that anymore. I started looking that same night. I sat in the garage with a blanket over my shoulders and my laptop on my knees, the Wi-Fi signal barely reaching out there, refreshing rental listings over and over again like something decent might suddenly appear if I just stared long enough. Most of what I found was out of reach. Either too expensive or too cramped, or in neighborhoods where I didn't feel safe leaving my equipment unattended for 5 minutes. But I kept searching, calculating what I could afford, subtracting utilities and insurance in my head, weighing the risk of moving against the slow suffocation of staying. 3 days later, I found it. A converted garage unit attached to a small house on the other side of town. The listing was basic, a few grainy photos and a vague description that said studio space, private entrance, no pets. I called the number right away, and the guy who answered sounded half asleep, but friendly. His name was Neil, mid-40s, ex-contractor, now retired and renting out part of his property to help cover his mortgage. I asked if I could see the place that afternoon, and he said, "Sure, if you don't mind dust." It wasn't fancy. The paint was chipped in places, and the flooring creaked near the back wall. But it had its own entrance, a working lock, a tiny kitchen nook, and just enough space for a bed in my setup. The walls were bare, but solid, and the window could be blacked out easily for filming. It smelled like someone hadn't opened the windows in a while, but it didn't smell like strangers. It didn't smell like someone else's kids. It smelled like freedom. We stood there awkwardly in the doorway after the tour, and Neil scratched the back of his neck and said, "It's not much, but it's quiet. No one's going to mess with your stuff." That was enough for me. I told him I'd take it. He nodded like he'd already figured I would. We filled out the paperwork right there on the kitchen counter. I transferred the deposit that night, 2 months rent up front. It was most of my savings, but I didn't hesitate. I had enough for groceries and a few bills if I took on extra freelance hours. If I was careful, I could make it work. And if something broke, at least it would be because of me, not because someone else thought my gear was just fancy toys. I didn't tell my mother. I didn't say a word to Tracy or the kids. I didn't tell anyone in that house what I was planning, because by that point, I didn't feel like I owed them anything. I spent the next 2 days moving what I could into my car late at night, one box at a time, wrapped in blankets so nothing rattled. I left the heaviest stuff for last. The monitor, the camera, the mic stand, each item packed with care, like I was finally pulling pieces of myself out of storage. Like I was reclaiming something I hadn't realized I'd given up. Every load I moved out felt lighter than the one before it. Not because of the weight, but because of what it meant. When I turned the key in the lock for the first time and stepped into that little unit with the cracked tile and creaky floorboards, I didn't feel disappointment. I felt air. I felt quiet. I felt mine. I waited until everything was packed. My car was full, trunk barely closing, passenger seat loaded with gear wrapped in towels. The apartment keys were in my pocket, and I'd already dropped off the first load the night before. All that was left was the last box and the last conversation. I didn't want to leave without saying something. Even after everything, some part of me still wanted her to understand. Not to apologize, not even to agree, just to get it. She was in the living room when I walked in, sitting on the couch with a coffee and the TV on low. Tracy wasn't around, and the kids were in the backyard. The timing was right. I stood there for a moment, not sure how to start. Then I just sat down on the edge of the couch and said it. "I'm moving out today." She glanced at me, one eyebrow raised, like I'd just said I was going to the store. "Where are you going?" she asked, sipping her coffee like this was just another morning. "I found a place. It's small, but it's mine. I signed the lease 2 days ago." She didn't answer right away. She looked at the TV, then at me again. "You're being impulsive," she said. "You didn't think this through. You won't make it without us." I took a breath and tried to stay calm. "I did think it through. I've been thinking about it every night since you gave my room away. Since you told me this wasn't my house. Since Tracy told me to respect their space, like I didn't even live here. I've thought about it more than I wanted to. She shook her head. You're overreacting. You always do this. You don't understand how hard things have been for Tracy. I do, I said. I do understand. That's why I didn't complain when they first moved in. That's why I offered a compromise. That's why I packed up my studio and slept in the garage for a week. But at some point, this stopped being about helping. It became about pretending I didn't exist. And when I tried to talk to you, all I got was silence. Or worse. She scoffed and leaned back on the couch. You're still just a kid, Oliver. You think you've got it all figured out, but life doesn't work that way. You don't just walk away when things get uncomfortable. I'm not walking away because it's uncomfortable, I said. I'm walking away because I was pushed out. You made it clear my space didn't matter. My work didn't matter. And when I tried to set a boundary, you called me selfish. She turned to me then, and there was something in her eyes I hadn't seen in a long time. Not anger, not disappointment, just disbelief. Like she really didn't understand how things had gotten to this point. You really think you're going to make it out there on your own? She asked. You think you can afford to live like that? What happens when money runs out? You'll be back here in a month. I stood up. I'd rather risk failing out there than keep shrinking myself in here. At least out there, the space is mine. And the failures are mine. I'm not doing this because it's easy. I'm doing it because staying here isn't an option anymore. She didn't say anything after that. Just looked back at the TV like the conversation was over. I waited for a second, just in case she'd change her mind, say something real, acknowledge that maybe she'd gone too far. But she didn't. So I turned and walked out. I closed the door quietly behind me, got into my car, and drove away without looking back. The first night in my new apartment was quiet in a way I hadn't felt in years. No footsteps overhead, no yelling from the hallway, no doors slamming open with kids charging into rooms that weren't theirs. Just silence and the low hum of my mini fridge and the occasional creak from the old wood underfoot. I unpacked slowly, methodically, setting up my studio in the corner of the room near the blackout-covered window. Every piece of gear I placed felt like I was putting part of myself back where it belonged. I didn't rush. There was no one here to move it or touch it or question whether I needed it. By the end of the second day, I was already back to editing. I'd reached out to a few old clients before the move and told them I'd be off-grid for a bit, but they were still around, waiting on new content. I powered through a backlog of footage, knocked out 2 short promotional edits, and sent over polished drafts by the third evening. No interruptions. No apologizing for delays. Just work and the satisfaction of seeing it done right. Within a week, the rhythm returned. The stress that had clung to me like a second skin at my mother's house started to dissolve. I woke up early without an alarm. I cooked for myself, even if it was just scrambled eggs and toast. I made coffee exactly the way I liked it and drank it in total stillness. The air felt different here. Lighter. Like I could finally breathe without waiting for someone to remind me I was in their way. The projects kept coming. A music video for a local band. A wedding edit for a couple who'd found me through a mutual client. Then a bigger job, a branding campaign for a startup that wanted sleek visuals and a fast turnaround. I worked long hours, but it never felt heavy. My gear stayed where I put it. My notes weren't lost or moved. I didn't have to lock anything away. And no one knocked on my door to ask if I could move so their kids could have more space. My income stabilized faster than I expected. For the first time, I started putting money into savings instead of just keeping myself afloat. I bought a new monitor, upgraded my editing software, and finally replaced the broken lens I'd been limping along with for months. With every small upgrade, I felt more grounded, more like myself. Neighbors respected my space. The landlord, Neil, knocked before stopping by and never once commented on the equipment or the hours I kept. Sometimes I caught him watching from the yard while I adjusted my lighting rig near the window, and he'd just nod once and walk away. He never told me to be quieter. He never suggested I was in the way. There were still hard days. Freelancing isn't magic. It's inconsistent and demanding and sometimes exhausting. But now, when I sat down at my desk, I didn't have to fight for the right to be there. I didn't have to explain why my work mattered or justify why I needed space. I just worked. And every finished project, every satisfied client, every invoice paid on time felt like proof that I hadn't been crazy for leaving. Proof that I wasn't selfish. I was just trying to live. For the first time in a long time, I was doing exactly that. Living, working, building something real. And I didn't owe anyone an apology for it. It had been just over 2 months since I moved out, and I hadn't heard a word from my mother in all that time. No texts, no voicemails, no awkward follow-ups or weak apologies. The silence had been total, and I honestly expected it to stay that way. I thought we'd both made our choices, that the door was closed for good. But then, out of nowhere, my phone rang late on a Thursday afternoon while I was exporting a project for a new client. I didn't recognize the number at first, But the second I answered and heard her voice, I knew. She was crying. Her voice was shaking like it hadn't in years. "Oliver," she said. I didn't know who else to call. "Tracy's gone. She moved out 2 days ago. She just packed her things and left with the kids in the middle of the night." I stayed quiet. I didn't know what she wanted from me yet, but I had a feeling it wasn't just to catch up. "I can't cover everything," she went on. "The electricity bill, the water, the groceries. I didn't realize how much you were doing until it stopped. Please, just come back for a while. We'll figure things out. I need your help." I didn't yell. I didn't throw the words back at her or bring up all the things she'd said. I just let the silence hang for a moment, then answered, calm and steady. "I'm not coming back," I said. "I'm not going back to a place where I wasn't respected. I have my own home now, my own space, and I'm doing fine." She didn't say anything right away. I could still hear her breathing, like she was trying to think of something to say that might change my mind. But she didn't have anything, and I didn't need to hear it anymore. So I told her, "Take care of yourself," and I hung up. When I set the phone down on my desk, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel triumphant or cold or spiteful. I just felt done, like something had finally finished unraveling, and all that was left was quiet. The kind of quiet I'd been fighting to find for years. I turned back to my screen and hit play on the final render preview. The timeline played smoothly. No skips. No dropped frames. Everything in its place. Thanks for sticking with me through this story. It's been a long one, and a personal one.